Pro-life talk. Real-world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I am your host, Josh Brom. We're here with Gabi Veers and my brother Tim Brom from Justice for All. And last week we started a discussion on different things that pro-choice people could legitimately become confused about what pro-life people believe, think, or intend based on arguments that we make or actions that we do or actions that we don't do. These aren't things that we're blaming pro-choice people for. We're just saying, yeah, there's legitimate possibilities of misinterpretation and confusion, and pro-life people ought to be able to clarify, as well as just being aware that these are possibilities that might exist. So if you didn't hear the last episode, go to prolifepodcast.net. Definitely listen to part one, but this is an extension of that idea. So now we have a very controversial topic that we haven't gotten into that often on Live Report. And so we're going to talk about it carefully. But that's basically the subject of birth control. Because here's the issue. A lot of pro-choice people, I know because I've talked to them, believe that pro-life people want to punish women for having premarital sex by forcing them to remain pregnant. And that seems clear because we're not just out there on college campuses as opposed to having like pro-life displays and stuff. We're not out there with like what Planned Parenthood sometimes might do or someone else might do with like a bucket of condoms and just indiscriminately passing them out, which they say would drop the abortion rate. So everybody wins. It's a win-win-win. We don't, typically pro-life groups aren't doing that. And so it seems like, well, if you don't do that, then like the only possible explanation is you're just being punitive against women. And so before we get into how we want to respond to that, it's a complicated issue. If you think this is simple, then you're not thinking hard enough about it, and we're going to try to talk about a complex discussion. But I also am aware that this show is not just a podcast. It's aired on a Catholic television station. It's aired on Protestant radio stations around California. And so here's what we're doing with this. We're not making claims about whether people ought to be on birth control. In fact, we're probably going to get into some claims that are probably more like, if you're listening, what you would expect Christians to believe. But here's what we're definitely not getting into. We're not going to get into the religious debate about whether you should be using any birth control, whether you should use chemical birth controls versus barrier methods. We're going to be doing more of that discussion later on in this season when we talk about how pro-life people ought to talk about birth control in general and the abortifacient aspect of that. So I'm not saying that there is no room for debate on this. I think there's room for a lot of debate on the way Christians should think about family planning. That's just not what we're talking about here. I'm placing that issue to the side and saying that's a legitimate discussion. We just can't do that and this other discussion in 27 minutes. So what we're discussing is how do we respond when pro-choice people come to us, no matter what your religion is, and even there are some pro-life atheists, but they would typically come to probably a Protestant or a Catholic pro-life person and say, why aren't you just handing out condoms in an attempt to reduce abortion versus all these other things you're doing? That's the setup. Tim, you've had to respond to this on campus. Why don't you talk to me about some of the things that you've done when you've talked about this?
Okay. First, I just want to say really quickly that I've heard this question in a couple of different forms. One of them is very much a challenge for me. Oh, yeah? Well... But I was at Arizona State University with Justice for All a few weeks ago, and I got so many people that came up to me and they're asking me, like, I am truly confused. You guys want to lower abortion. Why aren't you doing this? Like, not in an aggressive way, just truly, like, it blows their mind.
It's mystifying.
Right. And so we've been having a lot of conversations about this recently. And I think the critical thing for me is there's a couple of different kinds of concerns about something like handing out contraceptives. There's kind of principled concerns and there's some more pragmatic concerns. And I want to start off by focusing on the pragmatic concerns. And that is that there's an assumption going on here that I think the pro-choice person is making, that there aren't going to be any other side effects. If you just hand out condoms, then the only thing that's going to happen is then the abortion rate is going to magically lower, and that's it. And that's great, and we should want that. And we do want that. I would love for the abortion rate to be lower. The problem is that I don't think that's the only effect that it would have. So the question that I would ask the pro-choice person who's made that claim or asked me that question is, If you could convince me, or if you could somehow assure me with total certainty that the only effect of me handing a specific couple a condom is that they would not then get pregnant and have an abortion. There would be nothing else that would happen as a result of giving them that condom. Then I think I would do it. And what that tells me is, okay, so what's at play there? What's different?
Right.
And that seems clear to me. I have my principled concerns also, and we'll get to those. But for a second, let's let's engage that for a second.
Right.
Is that just me? What if it were you, or what if it were you? If you knew that that's the only difference that it would make, would you do it?
Possibly. At least possibly.
Yeah.
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, but certainly possibly. Would you agree, for everything to be super clear, 3 of us in this room are Protestant people.
Yep.
Do you think you would say you would have a different response to that if you were Catholic?
Absolutely.
Okay. So explain that just a little bit, just so that because we're not doing a Catholic versus Protestant debate here, but just so everyone kind of understands, like that distinction might be mattering for the way that you're personally responding. Just shed some light on that, I think.
Sure.
Would be a good idea.
So the Catholic view is that there's a problem with contraception because God designed sexual intimacy to have 2 components: the procreative, the producing of children, and the unitive. And I'm even though I'm not Catholic, I think there's actually something to that. I think there's a good argument there to be made, even though I'm not basing it on the authority of the church or anything. I think that sounds something like true. And so the concern for the Catholic Church is when you use contraception, you take those 2 things that God designed to be together and you break them apart, and that's wrong. So being a Protestant, I think there's something to that, and I have my concerns about contraception, but because I'm a Protestant, my concerns about that are nowhere near the level of the concerns of my Catholic friends.
Okay. So at this point, what you're willing to say is if this was super isolated, if we knew, you gave me 100% certainty that the only result from this is you're just not going to get pregnant, then
No other side effects.
and no other side effects, because that's what the pro-choice person, I think, usually is assuming. I think they're assuming that, hey, that's the only thing that's happening. So for them, I think that's why they almost feel like we're speaking an alien language when we're like, well, no, we wouldn't want to do that. That's no wonder they seem super mystified. So then, how do they respond, and how do you respond?
Well, I think the most critical side effect here, the most obvious side effect, is that if you hand out condoms, it seems plausible that more people will be having sex. That seems straightforward to me. Because if people have this view that condoms just make everything all better, and if as long as we use a condom, then there aren't going to be any negative side effects, and so it frees sex to just be whatever recreational activity you want it to be, without those pesky concerns of STDs or pregnancy or anything like that. And so if we just hand out condoms, yay, all of the children of the world get condoms, then okay. Great. Now sex is not something we have to worry about as much. At least that's their perception.
Right. So then if this does happen, this seems plausible to you that if we indiscriminately hand out condoms, then there'll be maybe more sex happening. Then there's this also idea, well, then maybe the abortion rate might not even drop. Maybe it would even go the other way. If more people are having sex and not wanting children, in theory, if they get pregnant, there might be this issue. Is this the pragmatic issue, that the direction that you're going?
That's a issue. That's not the one that I'm most concerned about.
Okay.
I think it seems at least possible that if you were to dramatically increase the rate of sexual activity among unmarried people, and then and if we assume that condoms are not completely effective at preventing pregnancy, which I know.
I thought they were magical.
Yeah, I mean, so Dumbledore did not come down and cast spells and then create condoms. That's not how it works. So
they break and people use them wrong.
Exactly. And so I don't know what the effectiveness of condoms is. I know it's less than 100%. If it's low, let's say, just for the sake of making the explanation easier to understand, let's say they're 50% effective. If we have twice as many people then having sex, then okay, how is that going to reduce the pregnancy rate? So I don't know what the effectiveness is, or how much more sex people have, but it's at least not straightforward and obvious to me that if we hand out condoms, that means that there's going to be fewer pregnancies and fewer abortions. So that's one issue. That's not my main concern.
Okay.
Because you could come to me and you could say, no, I can demonstrate that wouldn't be the case, and that wouldn't cause me to no longer have my concerns.
Yeah. Before you move on to the other pragmatic, you're more interested, because I agree this isn't the most important argument, but I do think it's worth discussing. I've had this discussion with several Planned Parenthood employees, because usually they're going to want to discuss. I mean, this is what they're talking about, and we did a life report episode a while back. I'll link to it on the website. But and I haven't re-looked at the data, but I looked really hard at the data back when we prepared for that episode, and we just saw this interesting thing that you wouldn't expect if the pro-choice kind of rhetoric is true, which is what we looked at was what are the states that are spending the most tax dollars on giving out free contraceptives. And by far the top two are California and New York. And New York actually a lot more than California. And I mean, New York has this, like, they're giving out condoms on the subways, or in the subway stations, or at the subways, and whatever. Like, you don't have to go to a medical clinic. You're just like, they're everywhere. It's not hard. I don't think it's generally hard to find access to these things. But then at the same time, California, New York, not just because of the population, but just like, per capita, or like when adjusted for population, we're in the top 5 states for abortion rate. So I didn't make a claim that using condoms or giving condoms out is going to drive the abortion rate up necessarily, but it's certainly not obvious to me that they're going to drive the abortion rate all the way down. It seems like that wouldn't be the case if all we need to do to reduce abortions was just give out condoms. Stop trying to make abortion legal. Stop talking to people about it. Stop trying to change people's opinions. Stop going to college campuses. Stop doing 40 Days for Life. Every pro-life person should be doing is giving these things out. Well, it seems like we at least have some data that's worth discussing. Well, what is it that I'm seeing here? And I've never heard anyone, I feel like everyone I've talked to has been like, I've never seen that data before. It's like, well, it's on your website. So that, I think it's at least there's a discussion that can be had now. But that's not the most important part of this discussion. That's not where you're wanting to focus on the pragmatic part of the discussion, right?
No, my pragmatic concern is more about teens having more sex, and I think it's genuinely bad for them to do that. I know that's a weird view, and I'm being all religious.
You're a prude.
No, I think I have good reason to believe that God designed sex, and He designed it to be in the confines of marriage. And it's not the kind of thing where God just kind of arbitrarily decided, well, let's see, what could I do to make things sinful that would make things more interesting? Well, sex is fun, and I'm making them really want that. So let's just say you can only have that in this little area. now we're gonna have some fun. No, I think that the reason sex outside of marriage is sinful is partially because it's bad for us. These things all kind of fit together. It's designed in this particular way, and we're designed in a particular way, and that's part of why it's sinful. I don't think that God makes things sin arbitrarily just to mess with us. It's bad for us to sin.
Yeah, and I think also that could be an area of common ground, maybe not the religious aspect, but when you're talking with someone who's pro-choice, I think they understand, and most people think that sex is something that's special. People who go out and indiscriminately have sex aren't necessarily esteemed as highly. And while people may not think that it's should strictly be within marriage, they still see it as something valuable. I had a conversation with a guy on campus. We were talking about abortion. He said that, well, what we really need to do is focus our efforts on sex education. And I said, well, he made the claim that in the state where he lives, parents just don't talk to their kids about it. He says, yeah, I definitely think parents need to be talking to their kids about this. That's important. I said, but, I also think that our culture doesn't value sex as much as it should, and that sometimes it's cheapened. And he was kind of goofing off before, and he immediately got really serious. He says, I think you're right. I have friends who've waited until they've gotten married to have sex. He says, and I really regret that I didn't do that. That's something really special that they get to share with one person for the rest of their life.
So would you agree that at this point, okay, so we've moved from this pragmatic argument, I think, to this principled argument that we actually think it's bad for unmarried people to have sex, and we're not wanting to encourage that or participate in it. We could say at this point we're basically appealing to religion.
Yeah, I think to some extent we are, but we're also not trying to outlaw condoms or something. This isn't an issue of religion, the fact that we have these religious views interfering with other people. People are asking us why we aren't doing this. Well, because we think it's really bad for people to be having sex outside of marriage. Why? Of course we're not going to be handing out condoms.
If we thought it was really trivial, maybe it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But since
Sure.
we don't think this is a trivial thing, I'm imagining in a conversation like this, I'm probably not going to convince this person that I'm right, that it's a big deal. When
We're clarifying our position.
We're clarifying our position and hoping that they're going to understand why it was at least plausible that we would have this conscience issue, that we're going to feel uncomfortable if we do believe this, then we're going to be uncomfortable encouraging it or doing something that implicitly endorses it, or maybe acts like we don't think it's a big deal because we don't think abortion's the only problem, or the only societal problem.
Yeah, and that would be true even if they could demonstrate that by handing out condoms we could lower the rate of abortions.
Right.
If it were the only way to lower the rate of abortions, then we'd have a really weird question. It's like, okay, so we've got this, and then we've got this. We have to try to figure out which one's worse and look at the numbers and how do we compare that. Then we'd have a really weird kind of a conversation about that.
So if only there was another way.
Yeah, if only there was another way.
The abortion rate.
Maybe we could talk to people. Maybe we could educate people about abortion and about fetal development and have conversations about science and philosophy, and maybe that kind of thing could actually work.
What if everyone started having this new kind of abortion conversation where they weren't yelling past each other and actually understanding each other?
Let's not get all revolutionary on us, Josh.
No.
It'll make a greater impact than simply handing out condoms. Condoms is a temporary fix, but if you change people's attitudes about abortion, that's what's going to reduce the abortion rate long term.
Yeah. I want to close this series with this one other idea. Now that we're done with the birth control discussion, we've been talking about different areas where legitimately pro-choice people can sometimes be confused about pro-life people's motives. So there's this one other one that I wanted to talk about, which is I think some pro-choice people are going to be confused about what role religion plays when they see pro-life people out on campus, for example, doing some kind of a display. If you weren't a Christian, would you actually be out here? And if not, is this just kind of your clever ploy to try to win people to the church, or are you trying to force religion on people or make religious laws? I think there's a lot of confusion that can come up about this. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I get this question a lot when I'm doing Justice for All events, and it's okay. So obviously, you're a religious person, right? You're a Christian, right? And sometimes I'll say, well, I don't know what you mean by Christian, but I know I love Jesus. If by Christian you mean if by Christian you mean hypocrite and hateful, nasty person, then no, I'm not a Christian. If by Christian you mean this, we'll have that conversation sometime. But essentially, they're making an assumption. Of course, I'm a religious person because I'm out here doing this pro-life thing.
Yeah, there's no pro-life atheists.
Right. Well, they don't usually see them.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they come to this, I think, fairly reasonable conclusion that all the or at least most of the active pro-life people are religious. So if that's true, it must just be this religious thing. And when people ask me that, I will commonly say, I am a Christian. If I'm not going to go down that road, I am a religious person. I believe in Jesus, and that matters to me a lot, and it affects my views. But even if I were an atheist, I think I'd be pro-life, because I think there are good reasons to believe that it's wrong to kill people, even if I'm taking religion out of it. I have this moral intuition, this feeling of indignation when we talk about killing other human beings. And I could have no explanation for that. I could have no idea why that would be. We're all just muck anyway. But still think, it just bothers me. It just seems like it's still wrong. And so to then, through moral reasoning, come to, okay, well, what about the unborn? Are the unborn human too? Do they have whatever it is that we have that makes us special, that makes it wrong to kill us? And I think that the best argument out there, the thing that explains all the data the best, is to say that it's our human nature that makes us valuable. And I could come to that conclusion even as an atheist. And so I'm not punting away from religion. Religion matters, and it's a big motivating factor for me. I think if I were an atheist, my guess is that I would be pro-life, but probably not doing the justice for all thing. Probably not doing active pro-life work, because I don't think I would care that much. I think I would still think it's wrong to kill people, but if we're all just muck anyway, I don't know if I'd go to all the trouble of dealing with it. I as a Christian am doing it because I think that God created life, and he gave his image to us, and so it's a really big deal when people destroy it. If we're just muck, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, but then there are active pro-life atheists, I think more now than there were before, and a lot of them are working with Kelsey Hazard, who's the head of secularprolife.org. She's an atheist, and she's actively, she's written a little book.
Good for her.
She's got a website. She's got a blog. So I think if she's listening, she might be like, well, gee, thanks a lot. Now you're, so what's going on there?
Right. So I'm glad for the clarification question, because I'm not throwing Kelsey Hazard or any other pro-life atheist under the bus. I'm saying what would my situation be? I'm answering the question the question that
Personally.
I get on campus. Would I be out here if I were a pro-life atheist? I think probably not. I'd probably be pro-life, but not doing much about it. Which maybe just means that Kelsey Hazard and every other pro-life atheist is just more virtuous than me. They care more about people even without religious notions than I do. That might be the case. I don't know.
Before we close the show, I want to talk about a current event story that just came up this last month. That I think we've talked about in Life Report before. How do you have these conversations with people when you don't have Justice for All there on campus, where you can stand in front of this display and have this thing?
It's really convenient.
It's really convenient. It's harder for people listening to our show. They're like, yeah, I want to get into dialogues, but I'm not there on campus with you. So it's a little bit, how do you naturally get into that? One of the things that we've said a lot of times is current event story. Is using something that people are talking about in the news, or maybe is in the news. Maybe not a lot of people are familiar with it, but it's in the news. If something recent has happened, that can be one of those things that you can put on Facebook, or even better, talk to your friend about it. This is a story that I think there's an easy common ground question here that you could ask your pro-choice friend. So February 12th, the ABC News reported that there was this teen in Texas who was suing her parents because they were coercing her to have an abortion. Her name's not identified, but what we know is that when the pregnancy was confirmed, the teenager's father allegedly became extremely angry, was insistent that the girl was not having the baby, that the decision was not up to her, according to this lawsuit. And he stated he was going to take her to have an abortion and that the decision was his. End of story. The teen claimed that her parents have taken away her phone, pulled her out of school, forced her to get 2 jobs, took away her car, basically in this effort to make her as miserable as possible so that she would just give in and have the abortion. There was also evidence of threats, including text messages from the girl's father, like physical threats, like I'm going to beat you kind of threats. And the lawsuit also claimed that the girl's mother had suggested maybe slipping her an abortion pill. So she sued, saying she doesn't want to have the abortion. She wants to marry the father of the baby. A week later, CBS Houston reported that she won the suit, which wasn't too much of a surprise. There's been lawsuits like this before. The teen, I'm not familiar of any times where the teen has lost that suit, at least when it's been, when the lawyers are, good at their job. And so let's talk about this. How could we, for the last few minutes, I've already got what's in my head, but before I do that, let me put to Gabi first. How could you use this conversation with a pro-choice friend, to use this story to start a conversation with a pro-choice friend?
Well, I think first of all, what's great about stories like this is that it's immediate common ground. Like should not even be a hesitation that this is common ground for both of you. And so just bring it up in conversation. Like, hey, I heard that this happened. Isn't this tragic? Isn't it so sad that there are girls in this country that have parents like this? Show empathy and show that you're human when you're talking about it. Don't just use it immediately as a tool to jump in to be like, yeah, so what do you think about abortion?
Right. Shouldn't it be illegal?
So don't you think it should be illegal to have abortions? Yeah, you don't want to be weird. Don't be weird. So first of all, talk about it, and just talk about it as 2 human beings who care about children in our country and that their rights are upheld, and that isn't it a great thing that we live in a country that has a justice system that protects girls from being coerced by their parents. And then from there, you can transition more naturally, I think, into the topic.
Right. But at some point, you've asked basically the question, can we agree even though you think maybe abortion should be legal, generally speaking, and at least the first trimester or whatever their view is, can we agree that even then, so that parents shouldn't be able to force their teen girl to have an abortion against her will? That would be the common ground question.
Yeah, I don't know if you would have to say that. Can we agree that her father shouldn't be allowed to force her? It should be pretty obvious. I think you could even phrase it like, hey, did you hear about what happened? Isn't that sad and tragic that there are parents who would think about forcing their kids? And then I think from
or what
there,
do you think or something?
Yeah,
or
what do you think? Can we agree that this is bad? It's kind of a little weird. It's like, well, yeah, what do you think I am?
Right. You don't want to imply that they would have this horrible view.
Exactly. Like they would actually think this is a good thing.
But you also don't want to assume what they think and
That's
act
true.
like you're assuming that. So there's this balance of
Right.
What would you do? Well, I completely agree with Gabi. But the other thing that I would say is this is a great way to talk about choice. People, the whole view that we hear all the time is, oh, I wouldn't get an abortion myself, or maybe I think it's morally wrong. But, well, I'm pro-choice. I think people should make their own choices. Well, if people should make their own choices, shouldn't they have the right to make the choice to not have an abortion? Isn't that part of choice? In order to make a choice, don't you have to have several possibilities that you can choose between? Pro-choice movement uses this kind of language. But you hear stories at abortion clinics, and it doesn't sound like they're interested in choice. If they really are just all about women having the choice to do what they need to do, then why do they deceive women about what abortion is? That doesn't sound like choice to me. That sounds like, for some reason, wanting them to have the abortion, thinking that's going to be best for them, or wanting it for financial reasons. I don't know. But it just does not sound like choice. And why has Planned Parenthood actively fought in different states when states have proposed, hey, let's have this pro-life incremental bill that makes it less likely that people will be coerced into having an abortion, where like she's in a room by herself and she has to sign a thing saying, I'm not being coerced into this, and she's why do they actively fight against bills like that when that should be what we can all agree? There seems to be some agenda going on.
Or even things that help with informed consent, like having an ultrasound or knowing exactly what the procedure does.
If you're really pro-choice, then you should be in favor of education so women can make informed choices. And if they want to not have the abortion, people shouldn't intimidate them or threaten them or anything like that to try to keep them from having the abortion. Because if so, then you are not pro-choice. Tim Brom is on staff with Justice for All. You can find out more about his work at jfaweb.org. Click on Meet the Mentors page, and he's right there at the top, and there's links where you can support Tim's work. That's our show. Have a great week.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.